In this episode, we speak with Ethan Thornton, founder of Mach Industries, which is building the next generation of defense systems. Ethan dropped out of MIT at the age of 19 to found Mach Industries, which was soon backed by Sequoia's Stephanie Zhan and Shaun Maguire, and eventually Bedrock Capital's founder, Geoff Lewis. Ethan ran a wood and metal workshop in high school to make the initial Mach products. Since 2020, Mach has been dedicated to solving the next generation of warfare with lethal systems that deter kinetic conflict and protect global security. Their team of elite engineers, manufacturers, and operators are creating a better defense system for the US and its allies. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you like the episode, click to follow.
RJ Lumba is the executive chairman of Market Insight Media and the managing partner of Growth Cap. He is the host of Great Entrepreneurs, a podcast for driven entrepreneurs and business owners. Our podcast covers all topics related to the entrepreneurial journey, from ideation to execution to optimization and to reaping the rewards of a well-run business. In the minutes ahead, we'll share with you unique insights and tactics from some of today's most accomplished and inspiring entrepreneurs.
Ethan, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So you're 21 years old. You've been called the next Elon Musk. You've raised over $80 million. You dropped out of MIT. How does it all feel?
It feels good. I would say that the comparisons are probably unfair, but I'm glad we've been able to raise capital to work on some important problems. And I'm glad we're sort of on track to solving a lot of those things, announcing our new products, obviously standing up this new factory. It all feels good.
I'm sure it's kind of like a whirlwind. I mean, at least from the outsider's perspective, a lot has happened in your young life. Maybe let's start at what gave you the confidence to drop out of school. You're at MIT. It's hard to get to MIT to begin with. There's a lot of resources there. There's a lot of people to meet. You could maybe iterate on ideas while you're there, but you decide to drop out to pursue your company full on. Why drop out?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to do something as difficult as Mach halfway, right? And I was very, very confident, not necessarily in my ability to do Mach, but in Mach being something that deeply had to exist for the world. And so it was impossible to expect to kind of hedge that bet and have any chance of success.
Now, is this something, this idea behind Mach, was it being developed even in your younger years as you were like growing up? Had you always had an interest in
kind of high school is when I started working on a lot of it.
Okay, got it. What was childhood like? Were you always interested in science, or were you always interested in warfare, technology, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I've loved math and science forever. And then more than that, I've always enjoyed sort of making things and building things. I'd say the obsession with unmanned systems was more kind of later in life, like started really in high school. But it's pretty clearly the future of warfare, right? And so as someone who's deeply patriotic, who wanted to do something to help the country, this became kind of the no-brainer solution, given how much I love building things.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Texas, near San Antonio.
Okay. And so was there a lot of early exposure to kind of maybe aspects to the industry you're in now?
Yeah, for sure. I had not immediate family members, but a few family members in the military. And then obviously San Antonio is a pretty big military town. So lots of friends whose parents were involved in the military. So yeah, definitely pretty involved in it. Like it was definitely like probably off course for me to go and work on something like this. But yeah, again, it's just a really important problem.
And when you're at school and you're starting to think about the problem, from what I've read, it sounds like you didn't necessarily have a co-founder and you decided kind of to take the leap on your own and then you started building around you. Is that the way it happened?
Yeah, exactly. I dropped out first, and then after we raised a bit more capital and had a bit more success, convinced my two buddies to drop out with me.
And how was the capital raising process? Was it fairly kind of soon that you were able to land the first seed round?
Yeah, pretty quickly. I dropped out in like the first month of classes was when I filled out my form. And then pretty close to that, even before the semester ended, was able to get a pre-seed together. And that gave us like 6 months of runway. And then was able to raise the seed round kind of the next spring from Sequoia. And
there's going to be folks in our audience that are not as familiar with what you're doing. Can you tell us about maybe your first two products, so to speak?
Absolutely. So Mach's goal is to build sort of an ecosystem of war-winning hardware, right? So every year work on 3 to 5 products, bring them to market, create customer interest around things that we see as like truly war-winning in a post-unmanned world. The kind of theses for our first 2 products in that vein are decentralized long-range fires. So essentially the ability to put a warhead downrange, very, very decentralized. And sort of what that means is that there's not a single launcher. There's not like a single point of infrastructure. These things are being launched kind of from everywhere at the same time in a way that makes as an adversary sort of back targeting very difficult. And then they're providing very, very precise strikes on strategic targets. So if you're looking to take out an aircraft on the runway, if you're looking to take out sort of logistics, if you're looking to take out a big important radar, again, very, very precise targeted attacks with these assets and to be able to make them at very large scale. So then being able to produce them by the thousands or tens of thousands here in the next few years. The actual architecture, one is a sort of high altitude stratospheric glider. The other is a vertical takeoff, essentially cruise missile.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned the idea of patriotism here. That's, one of the drivers for maybe why you pursued this. And I'm not as familiar with other defense tech companies. I mean, you have obviously Lockheed Martin, companies like that. When you produce weaponry, do you have an eye towards like, well, we will only sell this to the United States and we're going to limit who can actually purchase our weaponry?
Of course, for moral reasons and legal reasons. Morally, it's kind of a given. And then from a legal perspective, like the US very tightly controls how you export these things. So a major portion of our customer base will be other countries, but they'll be closely aligned with US interests. And the US obviously confirms who you're allowed to export to as well.
I know you have contracts with the US Army. These, missiles, so to speak, when are they going to be capable of being used?
Yeah, so we're looking to hit essentially very late stage final development by like September of this year. And at that point, the tech will be ready to deploy.
Got it. What's the grand vision? I mean, is there going to be continued products that you release, or is the iterations on the current product set?
It's both. For us as a company, we really look to become the preeminent hardware company for future warfare.
Mm-hmm.
So become very effective at looking what does the battlefield look like in 2 decades? Okay, let me go and bring products into the world to sort of create that future. Because it's existentially important that we're able to do that as a country, right? So right now, China pretty much matches our technology on manned systems and totally dominates on scale. So like a pretty terrifying example here is that one of our biggest UAV procurement programs is for on the order of like 10,000 systems in China, or 1 million systems last year. So again, they match our tech, they totally dominate on scale. And so what we look to do as a company is create like a perpetual institution for innovating on these ideas, for always making sure that the US has access to the best war-winning hardware. And so again, in the near future, that's bringing 3 to 5 products to market a year. I think pretty quickly we'll start doing deep domain research on like the actual science behind propulsion, behind energy storage, behind all of these different things that are like the core unlocks for future development of this technology. And then in line with that, we're also building out kind of the first survivable supply chain for these systems. So a lot of the factories we use to make military systems right now are very centralized, and then our supply chains aren't very secure. So they're either reliant on China or they aren't scalable. And so another part of what we're doing as a company is actually going and building decentralized, flexible manufacturing, and then working to kind of vertically integrate that supply chain. So this year, it's really the jet engine, it's the avionics, we're starting the radio, but eventually looking to be vertically integrated all the way up to the line.
One of the aspects to, something that's deeply technical and making a company successful is being able to find the best talent and hire the best talent. Have you gone about doing that? And do you hire each individual yourself?
Yeah, so unless someone comes like through network, insanely strongly recommended by someone I deeply trust, I'd still sit down for an interview with everyone we hire, and we'll hopefully continue to do so into perpetuity. That's just part of building a company, right? Is building a recruiting machine. So there's twofold. There's like, how do you get the company ready to make the best hires? And that comes down to mission. It comes down to sort of company trajectory. It comes down to like getting the company right in a few crucial ways. A main motivating factor for a number of people joining Mach is that you get to work in a hyper efficient environment to deliver war-winning capability. And that's like, if you're patriotic, if you're passionate about making the world a better place, like that is very, very, very motivating and makes recruiting very easy. Same on the company trajectory side, right? Like this time last year, we had about 20 people at the company. We really didn't have any products, no real go-to-market pipeline. Today, we have 3 products in late-stage development. We have 110 people. The beautiful thing about a startup is that folks are equity incentivized more than they are cash incentivized. And so they logically want to sort of draw point to point to point of what does my equity look like in a decade if sort of the company continues on this trend. And then it comes down to just having a well-run recruiting function, right? Like making sure you're facilitating on-sites right. I mean, all the technical folks we hire get up and do a big panel in front of a good number of our engineers, and sort of we really, really dig through details with them. Everyone has to come for an on-site, like making sure you're doing the right diligence on hires.
I imagine there's probably a mix in terms of the age range and experience level of folks working there. And I'm just curious, like, could you get someone who maybe worked at NASA, is like 40 years old and is kind of explaining to you their technical knowledge and you already inherently know it, even though you're 20 years younger than them and have less experience?
I mean, experience does definitely matter. And there's like a very, very dynamic age range in Mach. I'm still probably the youngest person at the company, but there are a good number of people who are like generally in this age class. I mean, we have folks who are like 80 and worked at Lockheed Martin for 2 decades, right? So like you have to accept that like different groups of people bring vastly different strengths to the table. I haven't sat around designing radar for 50 years. And so for me to expect that I can design like radar subcomponentry as well as that person is ultra naive. Now, at the same time, physics are physics. With an understanding of physics and first principles, you can understand a lot of these systems, but there's definitely skill involved past understanding. Like, sure, I can generally understand how a jet engine works, but my ability to very specifically go and run like cycle analysis on combustion is going to be near zero. You have to be able to dig into technical problems with your team when they arise. You certainly can't be in a position where your eyes glaze over when your engineers start talking about technical problems, but you also have to deeply trust people who have literally 1,000 times more experience in their field than you're going to. And so that's the tough balance.
Now, was Huntington Beach the clearer choice of where to be located? Was it just like an obvious thing? We're going to be located there.
Yeah, I mean, I initially wanted to build in Austin, and I think the deep domain engineering talent, specifically for aerospace in Austin, was difficult. I would say LA was very much the clear choice. So we ran like 6 months of pipeline, and we had like 15,000 candidates who had gone through, either applied or that we'd outreached or that had actually gone through the pipeline. And we went and looked, and like 95+% were in LA. So that was like pretty guaranteed that LA had to be the place. A lot of folks that were moving from Texas didn't want to be in LA County. And so then it was pretty clear somewhere in Orange County would be the best choice. And so Huntington's like the most north in Orange County because a lot of our talent comes down from the El Segundo, Hawthorne area.
And I imagine you're all in person or some people remote.
There are a few. Yeah, it's almost all in person. BD is like a decentralized team. So they're pretty spread out to be as close as possible to the customer. And then we have like literally 1 or 2 like software engineers who aren't in person.
What's been the hardest part so far about building this company?
I think it's always team building. If you find and motivate and empower the right people, you're going to have massive success. And if you don't, you won't. And so holding a high bar for who we choose to build teams around and then just effectively sort of executing it. It's difficult, right? Because you're sort of building the plane in flight. Like you're expected to ship products, you're expected to ramp manufacture, you're expected to win contracts. But while doing that, the ground is always moving under you as you're building out and sort of upgrading the team.
Mm-hmm. Are there some kind of clear indicators of when you're interviewing candidates that they're going to be a good fit for the team?
Yeah, being mission driven is like A1, number one importance. So like having a servant's mentality about driving towards securing Western defense is incredibly important. I think the second is like people can learn a lot. People rarely change their character or work ethic. And so sitting down with someone and really going through like why they made decisions, big decisions they made in their life, how hard they've worked previously, It's very rare that you find someone who's been a traditional 9 to 5er for the last 20 years that's going to suddenly step up and have like maniacal urgency on shipping a product. It's similarly rare that you found someone that the last 6 jobs they were at for 18 months and suddenly they're going to expect to join Mach and be here for 8 years and work with us to build a generational company. And so that's the next is just like, what is your trend for being conscientious? What's your trend for working hard? And then the final is like, you want someone who's excited about the job. Like if you're bringing a hardware engineer through the shop, you want them to like pick up hardware and like analyze every detail of it, right? If you're bringing a manufacturing engineer by, you want them to be like obsessively asking you about the pipeline to the point that it like makes you uncomfortable. It's really, really important that you find like obsessive people who love their jobs.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, are there a lot of good candidates that you find coming from the schools you would guess, like, you know, an MIT or like a Caltech, or is it really widespread? You know, folks can come from anywhere.
I honestly don't even look at what school people came from. I don't really care. I think it's so much more important what teams you participated on, what you built while you were in school, how hard you chose to push yourself after school. I would say the top 5% of most state schools is as good or better as anyone else at any Ivy League.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't think what school you went to matters at all.
We're coming up on time. I have 2 final questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
I would say my grandpa, my mom's dad. So he farms and I grew up helping him on the farm every summer and he taught me how to weld, taught me how to make knives. He and I worked on the aircraft all the time. And so, yeah, I learned a lot of what I know from him.
That's awesome. My standard closing question is if there's a charity cause or other endeavor that you're passionate about, but your endeavor in and of itself consumes enough time, I presume.
Yeah, and I do think it's like existentially important for us. If unmanned systems are the future of warfare, we are objectively losing the unmanned systems war, right? Like US tech on the unmanned system side has not succeeded in Ukraine. China has like fueled and learned from both sides of the Ukraine war. They're fielding literally hundreds of times more systems than we are. The unmanned future is already here. Wars are already being won or lost with unmanned systems, and the US is so far outpaced and sort of outclassed on those systems that I think, yeah, for me, like the only thing that matters is fixing that.
Awesome. Well, Ethan, want to thank you again for taking the time. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great chat.